Today we're starting a big billet of W feather pattern Damascus. I'm going to use some 2-inch wide 1075 and 15 and 20, 1/8 inch thick 1075, and the 15 and 20 is about 60 thousandths of an inch, so it's just under a 16th. This stuff is from T-Force. Don't normally use 2-inch wide, so I'm looking forward to seeing how that kind of subtly affects the pattern. It'll probably change stuff ever so slightly. I've also already taken the time to clean these off. The 1075 had some scale on it, and then the 15 and 20 was pickled, so it had just a little bit of like gray, whatever pickling finish left on there. This is gonna be a really nice clean W feather, so the layer alternations just go 1075, 15 and 20, 1075, 15 and 20, all the way through, just standard 1-to-1 ratio. 1-to-1, except for the outside edge is gonna have an extra piece of 1075, because I don't want that thin 15 and 20 to be on the very outside of the billet. I'm not used to working with this 2-inch wide material, so this doesn't look like that big of a billet to me. Normally I'd make it another inch high or so probably, but since it's 2 inches wide, we've got quite a bit of extra heft in there. It's gonna be a really high layer count W feather pattern. I also don't want the billet to have any exposed atmosphere to the layers, and I don't want to use borax because it's really hard on my forge, and I just get cleaner welds this way. I'm gonna do it. Weld the ends up solid, and then take this thin sheet metal, it's just mild steel sheet metal, put these pieces on the sides, and then weld up all the way around. Basically encapsulate the whole billet, so there's no atmosphere exposed to it. I'll weld the ends up too, so all these seams are completely welded up. Having no atmosphere exposed to the billet will help it so we don't get scale and stuff forming inside the billet. And it'll just result in really clean, solid forge welds between the layers. That takes care of the sides. I want to go ahead and cover the ends of the billet with weld because oxygen can still get to the billet from the end. Gotta clean up the tops and bottoms of all the pieces. I'm probably gonna hit them on the surface grinder to make them nice and flat. Got all these pieces surface ground. Need to clean up the edges a little bit because I got some ferric chloride on them yesterday, and it kind of left a dirty, rusty finish on there. And I want a nice clean TIG weld later, so I'm gonna clean the edges off. Right now there's numbers on here to show where the piece goes in the whole billet. I'm gonna put those numbers on the end because I'll probably end up grinding the numbers off when I clean these sides up. I'm gonna disc sand the mating surfaces on these pieces just so we leave a finer finish than what the surface grinder left.
The disc sander is taking too long and getting dull too quickly because I don't have coarse sandpaper for it. So I'm just gonna use the 120 grit belt on the 2x72 grinder to clean up the other 4 blocks.
Is that cone okay?
Yeah, it's great. No, the cone has got a bunch of gunk in there. Gonna inhibit the argon flow. I don't have any more. So we'll just use more argon.
That was more argon. I could hear it from here.
We need to get the pattern to mirror itself all the way through the whole billet. That's why I really wanted to keep track of the number of the pieces, and then I can lay them back out the way they were before it was all cut up. And that way we can alternate the layers and get it to all be mirrored all the way through the whole tower. And in order to get the pattern to mirror itself all the way through the billet, tip the first one over like that, and that makes that one perfectly mirrored. And then to continue on with that mirror effect, I just lift this one straight up on there. Then the next one gets tipped over and then straight up on there. And then roll that one over, every other one. And now the pattern is going through each piece and it's mirrored all the way through here as closely as you're able to get. I'm gonna start TIG welding these together. I'll probably just tack them at first, and then we'll come back after they're all tacked together and solid weld all the way around all the seams, so there won't be any oxygen getting to the inside of our welds. All the pattern right now is on this side and this side. So I'm going to put the heaviest welds to hold the billet together on the ends where the pattern is, because it'll be a little easier to get rid of the weld later if we put it on the ends. If I put the really heavy welds that go in deep on the sides, it's going to make us lose width on our final product a little bit, and we need this to be as wide as we can get it. Need to get a handle welded onto the billet now, and this is where the real challenge comes in with feather pattern. Getting this 8-inch tall billet into the forge and out of the forge when we smush it down, and then while we're doing our feathering and stuff, our feather pattern die is going to come down this way, right down through the center. So we can't have our handle on the side, because then the press would be in the way. So really the only place to put the handle is like right here. Then we can press it down and also get our feathering die in there and cut all the way down, and we'll end up cutting a little bit of the end of the handle, but not much of it. I'm gonna tack weld it on and then make sure that we can get it into the forge, because sometimes you can't even get it into the forge if it's at a 90-degree angle. Sometimes you gotta adjust the angle a little bit. So it's a little tricky. You gotta kind of work it in there, but it will fit in there. Go ahead and weld that on solid now. I'm gonna light the forge up, let it get good and hot, and then we'll stick this in there, get this up to welding temperature, and get it forge welded and start working it down on the press. I like to smash it down quite a bit before I feather it. So it's about 8 inches tall now. I'll probably smash it down to about 5.5, 6 inches tall before we start running through it with the feathering die. I gotta fix the feather pattern die before we cut it. It's all smushed over and mushroomed out really badly. You're gonna get it leveled off and get a nice small radius on the top of it. 20 minutes later. Got the feather pattern cutter ready to go here. It's got about a 3/16 inch radius on it, maybe bump it a 1/4 inch radius. You can change that depending on how much drag you want in your feather. If you want your feather to drag down and be really sweepy, put a bigger radius on there. If you want less drag, you want it to just barely have a little bit of a quill in the center of the feather, then you put a really tiny radius on here. grind. Heavy grinding.
So right here we have the light welds. I did really light passes on the sides of the billet, and we got to remove those completely now because we don't want them to get smashed further into the billet. So I'm going to remove those welds and the welds over on the end, and also clean up everything.
I got the pieces all cleaned up, and then I dipped them in ferric chloride real quick just to take a look at the pattern and to help us make sure the pattern gets lined up properly. Because now that we squish that through there, we're gonna put these pieces back together. I also wanted to make sure that I got the majority of the welds out, so etching it in the ferric chloride really shows you if you have any foreign material in there, like weld. I kind of had a little issue right at the end of getting my feather die through here. Got this gap right here. So it's gonna be hard to like fill that with weld without making a mess. So I might just take like a little piece of sheet metal and wrap around that big gap and then seal it up with the TIG welder. And that should all close up once we go to start forge welding this together and forging it out. So here's what it looks like if you end up with some weld left over in here. You see these kind of dark blotches? That's right where those seams are, and there's a little bit of weld left on there. But I've got the majority off, so we should be good to go. I also really ground the welds out of this area extra deep because we don't want weld left on the sides. Ready to go. Got that big gap covered up, got it TIG welded all the way around. Definitely have a handle on the situation now. We want to be really careful and slow forging this out, because from here on out we can really distort the pattern and mess it up. So I'm only going to be forging tiny little bits. I like to draw it out about 3/4 of the length of whatever blade I'm doing, and then cut off slices and then draw those slices out further after they're cut off of it. And I do that to prevent distortion. If you got to do a really, really long knife, you got to have a big, massive billet of feather. Otherwise, because like I could draw this out into a 35-inch blade, but if I drew this little billet out that long, it would distort it really badly. So the longer your blade is, the bigger your billet needs to be, just to eliminate that distortion. We're trying to get an 8-inch and a 6-inch blade out of this, plus some extra for fittings, which it should be enough. It's probably about 4.5, 5 inches long now, so it's not like I got to draw it out that long. Probably needed about 10 inches total though, because we have to forge a tang out too. Just got done forge welding the billet and drawing it out a little bit. It's not quite as wide as I'd like because we had a little issue, had a couple corners tear open on it. Possibly didn't have my heat high enough when I forge welded the stack or something. So I used a little borax and tried to get them to kind of close back up. And it looks like they closed back up for the most part. There's still one kind of really bad spot. But even if I couldn't get it to forge weld back together, I still wanted to get it to close up so that tear wouldn't keep going further. Kind of like when you open a bag of crackers and you know, you're pulling and pulling and pulling, and all of a sudden the whole bag rips in half. Wanted to stop that from happening. I normalized it like once at 1500 degrees and I'm gonna let it air cool. And I did that because if you just took it straight from working it on the press and let it air cool, it might be a little harder than it could have been. Like the press kind of sucks the heat out of it and hardens the steel a tiny bit. And we gotta cut this up into slices on the bandsaw, so I wanted it a little softer than normal. I'll probably weld it up to a solid bar, something like this, just so we can hold it vertically. You try to get it nice and square right here, so the blade will cut down through it straight. Got it on there square, I'm gonna go weld it up so we can hold it there permanently. This billet definitely could have been a little softer too. Well, that's skinny.
It's cutting back the other way.
That's supposed to be 5/16. It's 20 thousandths under. 15 and 20 and 1075. Got all these